1:43 in the morning, August 9, 1942. The waters between Savo Island and Guadalcanal lay black as coal under a moonless sky. Aboard the heavy cruiser USS Vincennes, Captain Frederick Reef Cole stood on the bridge, watching aerial flares suddenly bloom to the south like white phosphorus flowers against the darkness. His ship was on patrol, steaming in a lazy box pattern between Tulagi Anchorage and Savo Island, protecting the American transports that had been unloading Marines for the past 2 days. Someone was dropping flares, but who? The question hung in the humid tropical air for exactly 7 minutes. Then searchlights snapped on, brilliant white beams lancing across the water, catching Vincennes in their glare like an insect pinned to cardboard. Before Reef Cole could give the order to open fire, shells began falling. Not friendly fire. Japanese shells, heavy caliber, 8-inch rounds that could punch through steel plate like a fist through paper. If you're enjoying this deep dive into the story, hit the subscribe button and let us know in the comments from where in the world you are watching from today. The battle that followed would last 37 minutes. When the sun rose over Iron Bottom Sound just past 6 in the morning, 4 Allied heavy cruisers would be gone. USS Quincy, USS Vincennes, USS Astoria, HMAS Canberra, over 1,000 American and Australian sailors dead, hundreds more wounded, burned, drowning in fuel oil, the worst defeat in United States naval history, worse even than the initial attack at Pearl Harbor, when measured by the speed and completeness of the catastrophe. But here is the profound irony that would haunt American naval commanders for years afterward. The Japanese task force that delivered this devastating blow should never have reached the Allied screening force undetected. Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa's 7 cruisers and 1 destroyer had sailed nearly 400 miles down New Georgia Sound, a channel the sailors called the Slot, in broad daylight. American search planes had spotted them. Allied coastwatchers in the Solomon Islands had reported them. The picket destroyers USS Blue and USS Ralph Talbot had the best radar in the screening force, positioned specifically to provide early warning of exactly this kind of attack. Yet Mikawa's ships slipped between the radar pickets like shadows, passed within 1 mile of USS Blue without being detected, circled Savo Island, and struck with complete surprise. The Japanese executed a nearly flawless night attack. The Americans, despite technological advantages and defensive positioning, failed to see them coming until searchlights illuminated their ships and torpedoes were already in the water. How does a force of 8 large warships, moving at high speed, evade detection by a modern fleet equipped with radar, split into defensive groups specifically to prevent such an attack, and annihilate 4 cruisers in half an hour while suffering minimal damage in return? How does the world's most powerful navy, warned multiple times that enemy ships were approaching, lose 4 frontline warships to an opponent it outnumbered, in waters it controlled, while protecting an invasion it had launched only 48 hours earlier? Oh, the answer reveals something darker than simple tactical failure. It exposes the dangerous gap between technological capability and tactical competence, between having the tools of victory and knowing how to use them. It demonstrates how institutional arrogance, poor coordination, and fractured command authority can transform defensive advantage into catastrophic defeat. And it shows how one commander's caution, one decision not to press an attack when victory was already won, would save an American invasion and change the course of the Pacific War, though neither side understood it at the time. This is the story of Savo Island, where everything went wrong for the Americans, everything went right for the Japanese, and yet the ultimate strategic outcome favored the side that lost. August 7, 1942, marked the first American offensive operation of World War II in the Pacific. For 8 months following Pearl Harbor, Japan had seized territory across East Asia and the Pacific, with stunning speed: Wake Island, Guam, the Philippines, Malaya, Singapore, Burma, the Dutch East Indies. By early 1942, the Japanese Empire controlled an area larger than the continental United States, stretching from the borders of India to the Central Pacific, from the Aleutian Islands south to New Guinea. The strategic situation began shifting in May 1942 at the Battle of the Coral Sea, where American and Australian naval forces halted a Japanese advance toward Port Moresby. Then came Midway in June, where American dive bombers destroyed 4 Japanese aircraft carriers in a single day, breaking the back of Japan's carrier striking force and shifting the naval balance in the Pacific. The United States could finally contemplate offensive action. The target was Guadalcanal, a malarial jungle island in the Solomon Chain, 90 miles long and 25 miles wide, inhabited by perhaps 10,000 indigenous people and covered by triple canopy rainforest. The Japanese had occupied Guadalcanal in May 1942 and immediately began constructing an airfield at Lunga Point on the north coast. If completed, this airfield would allow Japanese bombers to strike Allied supply lines between the United States and Australia, potentially severing the lifeline that kept Australia in the war. American planners moved quickly. Operation Watchtower, as the invasion was officially designated, received a more accurate nickname from the Marines who would execute it. Operation Shoestring. Everything about the operation was improvised, rushed, inadequately prepared. The 1st Marine Division, commanded by Major General Alexander Vandergrift, had arrived in New Zealand expecting 6 months of training before combat. Instead, they received 6 weeks. Maps of Guadalcanal were scarce and inaccurate, often based on obsolete surveys from the 1800s. Intelligence about Japanese strength on the island was fragmentary at best. The assault force assembled whatever equipment and supplies could be scraped together in the South Pacific, loaded it aboard 75 transport and cargo ships, and sailed for the Solomons. The landing on August 7th surprised the Japanese completely. 11,000 Marines hit the beaches at Guadalcanal, while additional forces seized the smaller islands of Tulagi, Gavutu, and Tanambogo, across Sea Lark Channel. Japanese construction workers at Lunga Point fled into the jungle, abandoning the nearly complete airfield along with stockpiles of rice, fuel, construction equipment, and 2 steamrollers. By nightfall on August 7th, American Marines controlled Henderson Field, as they immediately renamed the airstrip and had established a defensive perimeter. The first phase of Operation Watchtower had succeeded beyond all expectations. But now came the vulnerable period. The transport ships needed several more days to unload supplies, ammunition, food, and equipment. During this time, they would be exposed to Japanese air attack from Rabaul, 600 miles to the northwest, and potentially to naval attack as well. To protect the transports, Rear Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner commanded a screening force of cruisers and destroyers under British Rear Admiral Victor Crutchley. 8 cruisers, 15 destroyers, 3 American aircraft carriers providing air cover from positions south of Guadalcanal. The naval doctrine governing this defensive deployment reflected pre-war American thinking about fleet operations. Cruisers and destroyers would form protective screens around high-value assets. The transports, radar-equipped picket ships would provide early warning of enemy approach. Searchlights and star shells would illuminate targets for American guns. Superior American fire control systems, better trained crews, and numerical advantage would ensure victory in any surface engagement. This doctrine rested on several assumptions. First, that radar would detect enemy ships at sufficient range to allow defensive preparations. Second, that American crews could fight effectively at night with minimal rest. Third, that command relationships were clearly established and commanders understood their roles. And fourth, that the Japanese Navy, while brave and aggressive, lacked the training and coordination to execute complex night attacks against alert, well-prepared defenders. Every single one of these assumptions was wrong. The Imperial Japanese Navy had spent the previous 2 decades perfecting night combat tactics specifically designed to offset American numerical superiority. Japanese doctrine emphasized aggressive night torpedo attacks, superior optics for night observation, and intensive training in low light conditions. Japanese lookouts trained their eyes in dim red light to preserve night vision. Japanese ships practiced complex maneuvers in darkness until crews could execute formation changes by feel. Japanese torpedoes, the Type 93 Long Lance, could travel 11 miles at 49 knots, nearly twice the range and speed of American torpedoes, and left no visible wake because they ran on pure oxygen instead of compressed air. Vice Admiral Gunichi Mikawa, commanding the Japanese 8th Fleet from his headquarters at Rabaul, learned of the American landings at Guadalcanal within hours. His response was immediate and aggressive. Every available warship would sortie for Guadalcanal that night. The mission: destroy the Allied screening force, then attack the transports supporting the invasion. Mikawa assembled his strike force quickly, his flagship, the heavy cruiser Chokai. 4 heavy cruisers of Cruiser Division 6 under Rear Admiral Aritomo Goto, Aoba, Kinugasa, Furutaka, and Kako. 2 light cruisers, Tenryu and Yubari. 1 destroyer, Unagi. 7 cruisers and 1 destroyer against 8 Allied cruisers and 15 destroyers. The numbers favored the Allies, but Mikawa would have darkness, surprise, and superior night fighting doctrine on his side. At 8 in the morning on August 8th, Mikawa's task force departed Rabaul and steamed south down the slot at 24 knots. Around 10:30 that morning, an Australian Hudson bomber spotted the Japanese ships near Bougainville Island and radioed a contact report. The message reached Allied commanders hours later, garbled and incomplete, reporting seaplanes and cruisers, but providing no indication of course or speed. Around noon, an American B-17 Flying Fortress overflew the Japanese formation, and also reported cruisers heading southeast. Again, the intelligence reached Turner and Crutchley late and fragmented. Neither Allied commander recognized these sightings as the approach of a major attack force. Turner believed the Japanese ships were probably reinforcing their base at Gizo, a normal logistics run. Crutchley assumed any Japanese naval response would come from carrier aircraft, not surface ships attempting a night attack through restricted waters. The prevailing belief among Allied commanders held that Japanese admirals, while aggressive, would not risk valuable cruisers in a night surface action against a superior force in unfamiliar waters. Such an attack would be tactically reckless, strategically unsound, and operationally suicidal. This fundamental misunderstanding of Japanese naval doctrine would prove fatal. While Turner and Crutchley dismissed the contact reports as routine, Mikawa pressed south through the slot, his crews at battle stations, his ships cleared for action, his plan already formed. He would approach Savo Island under cover of darkness, pass south of the island, strike the southern screening group first, then turn north around Savo to engage the northern force before withdrawing back up the slot before daybreak. Speed, violence, and shock action would compensate for inferior numbers. The entire attack would take perhaps 2 hours from first contact to final withdrawal. On the evening of August 8th, Turner called a conference aboard his flagship, the transport USS Macaulay, anchored off Guadalcanal. Crutchley attended, bringing with him the heavy cruiser HMAS Australia, and removing her from the southern screening group. The meeting lasted past dark. While senior commanders discussed logistics and air cover aboard Macaulay, the screening force maintained its patrol pattern around Savo Island, crews exhausted from 2 days of continuous general quarters during air attacks, half the sailors at condition, 2 alert status, the other half resting, ships steaming predictable box patterns, radar operators watching green scopes in darkened compartments, lookouts scanning black water under overcast skies. Mikawa's ships entered the slot between Savo Island and Cape Esperance at 1:33 in the morning. The Allied radar pickets detected nothing. The battle was about to begin. The SC radar installed aboard USS Blue and USS Ralph Talbot represented the latest American surface search technology available in August 1942. Developed by the Naval Research Laboratory, the SC radar operated on a wavelength of 1.5 meters, approximately 195 megahertz, with a maximum theoretical range of 15 nautical miles against large surface targets under ideal conditions. The rotating antenna, mounted high on each destroyer's mast, swept through 360 degrees every 4 seconds, painting a circular picture on a circular cathode ray tube display below decks in the Combat Information Center. Under ideal conditions, SC radar could detect a cruiser-sized target at approximately 12 to 14 miles. But ideal conditions did not exist at Savo Island on the night of August 8. The radar's long wavelength made it vulnerable to land interference, and Savo Island itself created a massive radar shadow extending for miles in multiple directions. The mountainous terrain of Guadalcanal to the south and Florida Island to the east created additional blind spots. When USS Blue steamed her assigned patrol pattern southwest of Savo Island, large portions of the northern approach remained invisible to her radar. When USS Ralph Talbot patrolled northwest of the island, much of the southern approach disappeared into the radar shadow. Admiral Crutchley's defensive plan assumed the 2 radar pickets, positioned 7 miles west of Savo Island, would detect approaching enemy ships at sufficient range to provide at least 15 to 20 minutes warning. This assumption proved fatally optimistic. The patrol tracks assigned to Blue and Ralph Talbot were not coordinated. Each destroyer followed an independent rectangular pattern, steaming at 12 knots, the patterns separated by as much as 14 to 20 miles at their maximum divergence. A Japanese task force approaching between the 2 patterns could potentially pass undetected between them. The crews of both destroyers had been at general quarters continuously for 2 days, responding to repeated Japanese air attacks. Exhaustion affected everyone from the radar operators, staring at green scopes in darkened compartments, to the lookouts scanning black water with binoculars. The pre-war doctrine that assumed alert, rested crews maintaining perfect vigilance throughout prolonged operations had collided with the reality of sustained combat operations. At 54 minutes past midnight, USS Blue completed one leg of her patrol track and reversed course, turning 180 degrees to steam back along the same line. At precisely this moment, Mikawa's lead ship, the heavy cruiser Chokai, came within approximately 2 miles of Blue's starboard beam. Chokai's lookouts spotted the American destroyer clearly. Mikawa ordered his entire column to slow to 22 knots to reduce their wakes, trained every gun in his force on Blue, and prepared to open fire if the destroyer showed any sign of detection. Blue steamed away, oblivious, her radar unable to distinguish the Japanese ships from the landmass of Savo Island in the background. Her lookouts scanning the wrong sector of ocean. 10 miles to the north, USS Ralph Talbot continued her patrol, equally unaware of the enemy column passing between the 2 pickets. Neither destroyer detected anything unusual. Neither reported contact. Neither transmitted warning. The radar that was supposed to provide early warning had failed completely, not because of equipment malfunction, but because of inherent technical limitations that Allied commanders did not fully understand, and environmental conditions that rendered the technology effectively useless. The Southern Force, cruising between Savo Island and Guadalcanal, had no idea enemy ships had penetrated the outer defensive screen. The 3 cruisers and 2 destroyers steamed in predictable patterns, half the crews at condition, 2 rest status, the other half at their stations but dulled by exhaustion and the monotony of patrol. HMAS Australia, Admiral Crutchley's flagship and the most powerful ship in the Southern Group, had departed hours earlier to attend Turner's conference, leaving HMAS Canberra and USS Chicago with their destroyer escorts Patterson and Bagley. The Northern Force, consisting of USS Vincennes, USS Astoria, USS Quincy, and destroyers Helm and Wilson, maintained their box patrol between Savo and Florida Island, equally unaware that Japanese cruisers were about to round the southern shore of Savo Island and strike the Southern Force within minutes. The technological advantage that American commanders had counted on had evaporated. The battle would be decided by Japanese night fighting skill against American unpreparedness. 1:36 in the morning, Admiral Mikawa, standing on Chokai's bridge, gave the order transmitted throughout his column. Independent firing. 3 minutes earlier, his lookouts had spotted the American destroyers Patterson and Bagley leading the Southern Force, followed by the cruisers Canberra and Chicago. Japanese float planes, launched earlier from the cruisers, now dropped parachute flares over the anchorages at Guadalcanal and Tulagi, brilliant white magnesium light spilling across the water, silhouetting the Allied ships against the glow of the burning transport. George F. Elliott, still smoldering from the afternoon air attack. USS Patterson, steaming ahead of HMAS Canberra, sighted the Japanese column first. Her signal lamp flashed urgently. Warning, warning, strange ships entering harbor. Patterson's radio operator transmitted the same message, but atmospheric conditions and radio discipline failures meant that not every Allied ship received it. Even as Patterson's warning went out, Mikawa's ships opened fire with torpedoes and guns. HMAS Canberra never had a chance to fight. At 1:43, less than 1 minute after Patterson's warning, torpedoes from Chokai and Furataka struck Canberra on her starboard side. Simultaneously, salvos of 8-inch shells from 4 Japanese cruisers crashed into the Australian heavy cruiser. 24 major caliber hits in 3 minutes. The first shells killed Canberra's gunnery officer and mortally wounded her captain, Commander Frank Getting. They destroyed both boiler rooms, knocking out all electrical power before Canberra could train out her guns or communicate with other ships. The cruiser glided to a halt, on fire, listing 5 to 10 degrees to starboard, unable to pump flooded compartments or fight fires. Her entire participation in the battle lasted less than 4 minutes, from first hit to complete immobilization. USS Chicago, second ship in the Southern Formation, took a torpedo in her bow that blew away 40 feet of her forward hull, but missed her magazines. Her captain, Howard Bode, had assumed command of the Southern Group when Admiral Crutchley departed with HMAS Australia, but Crutchley had not explicitly informed Bode of this command transfer, and Bode remained uncertain of his authority. As shells fell around Chicago and his ship took torpedo damage, Bode turned west, away from the action, and did not transmit warning to the Northern Force. Chicago fired at what her crew thought were enemy ships but hit nothing significant. Within 6 minutes of the Japanese opening fire, the Southern force had been effectively neutralized. 1 cruiser dead in the water and sinking, 1 cruiser damaged and withdrawing, the destroyers still trying to understand what was happening. Mikawa's column swept around the southern coast of Savo Island at 30 knots, turning northwest. The initial attack had succeeded beyond expectations. Now came the second phase. At 1:44, Mikawa's force inadvertently split into 2 columns during the turn. Chokai led Aoba, Kinugasa, and Kako in the starboard column. Furataka, with the light cruisers Tenryu and Yubari, formed the port column. This unplanned division actually improved the tactical situation. The Northern Force, consisting of USS Vincennes, USS Astoria, and USS Quincy with their destroyer escorts, would now be caught between 2 attacking columns. If you find this story engaging, please take a moment to subscribe and enable notifications. It helps us continue producing in-depth content like this. The American cruisers of the Northern Force had seen the flares to the south. They had heard gunfire. Some ships had sounded general quarters, but no one had transmitted clear information about what was happening. The 3 cruisers continued their patrol pattern, captains rushing to their bridges, gun crews scrambling to battle stations, confusion spreading through ships that had been at Condition 2 rest status minutes earlier. They had perhaps 5 minutes before the Japanese columns would be in firing range. It would not be enough time to prepare. 1:50 in the morning, USS Vincennes, leading the Northern Formation, spotted searchlights illuminating ships to the south. Captain Frederick Reef Cole hesitated to open fire, believing the searchlights might be from friendly ships. The hesitation lasted less than 1 minute, but in night combat, 1 minute was an eternity. At 1:53, the Japanese cruiser Kako illuminated Vincennes with searchlights and opened fire. Vincennes responded with her main battery, her 9 8-inch guns firing toward the searchlight sources, but Japanese shells were already falling with deadly accuracy. At 1:55, 2 torpedoes from Chokai struck Vincennes, one hitting below the waterline amidships, the second penetrating near the forward fire room. Both torpedo rooms flooded immediately. Kinugasa joined Kako in pounding the American cruiser with 8-inch shells. Vincennes managed to score one hit on Kinugasa, damaging her steering mechanism, but Japanese fire was overwhelming. At 2:03, a torpedo from the light cruiser Yubari struck Vincennes, destroying her remaining boiler rooms. The ship came to a halt, burning everywhere, listing heavily to port. Captain Reef Cole ordered abandon ship at 2:16. Vincennes sank at 2:50. USS Astoria, second in the northern column, had spotted the aerial flares over the southern force engagement and called general quarters. But when Japanese searchlights illuminated the area at 1:52, Astoria's Captain William Greenman feared his ships might be firing on friendly forces and ordered ceasefire. Shells were already falling around Astoria when Greenman resumed firing less than 1 minute later. The brief delay proved fatal. Heavy cruiser Chokai found Astoria's range quickly. Between 2 and 2:15, Ioba, Kinugasa, and Kako joined the bombardment, destroying Astoria's engine room and bringing the burning cruiser to a halt. Astoria remained afloat longer than her sister ships, her damage control parties fighting fires and flooding through the morning hours, but she finally capsized to port at 12:35 in the afternoon of August 9th. USS Quincy, third ship in the northern formation, saw the flares and gunfire to the south. Captain Samuel Moore reached the bridge and immediately ordered his guns to commence firing, but the gun crews were not yet ready. Within minutes, Quincy was caught in crossfire between Japanese columns, shells crashing into her superstructure from multiple directions. Moore ordered full speed ahead and attempted to charge the eastern Japanese column, but at 2:08, 2 torpedoes from Tenryu struck Quincy, causing catastrophic damage. One salvo from Quincy's main battery hit Chokai's chart room, 20 feet from Admiral Mikawa, killing or wounding 36 Japanese sailors, but this single successful hit barely slowed the Japanese attack. At 2:10, a deluge of shells struck Quincy's bridge, killing or wounding nearly everyone there, including Captain Moore. The assistant gunnery officer, sent to the bridge for instructions, found carnage. Only the helmsman remained standing, trying desperately to steer the ship toward Savo Island. Captain Moore lay near the wheel, mortally wounded, the senior officer reported. On questioning him, I found out that the captain, who at that time was laying near the wheel, had instructed him to beach the ship, and he was trying to head for Savo Island, distant some 4 miles on the port quarter. I stepped to the port side of the pilot house and looked out to find the island and noted that the ship was heeling rapidly to port, sinking by the bow. At that instant the captain straightened up and fell back, apparently dead, without having uttered any sound other than a moan. Moore's last order, beach the ship, would never be carried out. Quincy capsized and sank at 2:38 in the morning, bow first, taking 370 of her crew with her, including her captain. She was the first of the 4 Allied heavy cruisers to disappear beneath the waves of what would soon be called Iron Bottom Sound. By 2:16, the Japanese columns ceased fire and withdrew around the north side of Savo Island. The entire engagement had lasted 37 minutes. At 2:16 in the morning, Admiral Mikawa conferred with his staff aboard Chokai. His cruisers were scattered across several miles of ocean. His torpedo tubes needed reloading, a labor-intensive process requiring at least an hour. His ships had expended much of their ammunition. He did not know the locations of remaining Allied warships. Most critically, he believed American aircraft carriers remained in striking range, and daylight would arrive in less than 4 hours. The transport ships lay at anchor off Guadalcanal and Tulagi, helpless and undefended. Dozens of cargo vessels packed with supplies, ammunition, equipment, and fuel for the Marines ashore. The complete destruction of the Allied screening force meant nothing stood between Mikawa's cruisers and those transports except time and darkness. 1 more hour of attacks could potentially destroy the entire invasion force and leave 11,000 Marines stranded without adequate supplies. Mikawa ordered withdrawal. At 2:23 in the morning, his force turned north around Savo Island and headed back up the slot toward Rabaul at high speed. The decision would haunt him for the rest of his life. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, commander of the combined fleet, initially sent congratulations for the tactical victory. Later, when Japanese commanders realized Mikawa had left the transports untouched, criticism became intense. His fellow admirals questioned why he had not pressed the attack. His army counterparts complained that destroying the screening force meant nothing if the Marines still received their supplies. Mikawa maintained until his death in 1981 that his decision had been correct based on available information. He believed carriers were nearby. He had been explicitly instructed by Chief of Naval Staff Admiral Osami Nagano to avoid losing ships if possible. He calculated insufficient time remained to locate and attack the transports, reload torpedoes, and withdraw to safety before dawn carrier strikes could catch his force. The American carriers had in fact withdrawn south the previous evening and were already out of striking range. But Mikawa had no way of knowing this. The irony was complete. Mikawa had achieved tactical victory through aggressive night attack, then negated strategic advantage through excessive caution. The Americans had suffered catastrophic tactical defeat through poor preparation and fractured command, yet maintained strategic position, because Mikawa withdrew before attacking the critical target. As Mikawa's force headed north, one final blow awaited. He detached the 4 cruisers of Cruiser Division 6, Alba, Kako, Kinugasa, and Furutaka, sending them separately to Kavieng, while he took the remainder of his force to Rabaul. At 7:50 on the morning of August 10, USS S-44, an elderly submarine built in 1923 and commanded by Lieutenant Commander John Moore, detected the 4 cruisers off New Island. The Japanese ships were not zigzagging, not conducting anti-submarine maneuvers, steaming in column formation at cruising speed. At 8:06, S-44 fired 4 torpedoes at the rear ship, heavy cruiser Kako, from 700 yards range. By 8:08, 3 torpedoes had struck home. Kako had all her portholes open for ventilation after the hot night action. Water flooded through the torpedo holes and opened portholes simultaneously. Within 5 minutes, Kako rolled to starboard and sank, bow first off Sinbari Island. The other 3 cruisers rescued most of Kako's crew, but 34 sailors went down with the ship, including her captain. The Battle of Savo Island had claimed its final victim. 4 Allied heavy cruisers sunk or scuttled, 1 Japanese heavy cruiser torpedoed and destroyed. Over 1,100 Allied sailors dead, 58 Japanese killed in the surface action, plus 34 more lost with Kako. The worst defeat in United States naval history measured by the speed and completeness of the catastrophe, yet the invasion survived. The Marines held Henderson Field. The transports, though forced to depart early with cargo still in their holds, had unloaded enough supplies to sustain the beachhead. The strategic objective remained secured despite tactical disaster. The United States Navy convened a formal board of inquiry in December 1942 to investigate the disaster. Headed by Admiral Arthur Hepburn, chairman of the General Board of the Navy, the investigation interviewed every major officer involved who survived. The Hepburn Report, as it became known, distributed blame carefully and politically. The board recommended official censure for only one officer, Captain Howard Bode of USS Chicago, for failing to broadcast warning to the Northern Force after his ship was torpedoed. Captain Bode never faced formal action. On April 19, 1943, while stationed at Balboa in the Panama Canal Zone, Bode learned the report would be especially critical of his conduct. That same day, he shot himself in his quarters. He died the following morning. The official cause of death was listed as suicide. The unofficial cause was Savo Island. 8 months delayed. The report stopped short of recommending action against other senior officers. Admiral Frank Jack Fletcher, who withdrew the carriers before the battle. Admiral Richmond Kelly Turner, who failed to ensure adequate reconnaissance of the slot. Admiral John McCain, who did not conduct requested afternoon search missions and did not inform Turner they had not been executed. Rear Admiral Victor Crutchley, who left his flagship position to attend Turner's conference, removing HMAS Australia from the screening force. Captain Frederick Reef Cole of Vincennes, who hesitated to open fire on Japanese searchlights. The report acknowledged multiple systemic failures, Radar was less capable than commanders believed, especially near land masses. Crew exhaustion after 2 days of continuous general quarters degraded alertness and decision-making. Command relationships were unclear, with Crutchley uncertain whether he retained tactical command after departing for Turner's conference. Communications procedures were inadequate, with critical intelligence reports arriving late or garbled. Naval doctrine underestimated Japanese night fighting capabilities and overestimated American technological advantages. Admiral Turner later assessed the root cause more bluntly. The Navy was still obsessed with a strong feeling of technical and mental superiority over the enemy. This arrogance had collided with reality at Savo Island. The collision killed over 1,000 sailors and sank 4 cruisers in 37 minutes. Yet the battle's strategic outcome contradicted its tactical result. The Marines on Guadalcanal held their positions. Henderson Field became operational on August 20th when the escort carrier USS Long Island delivered 31 Marine Corps aircraft. These fighters and dive bombers, operating from the captured airfield, gave Allied forces air superiority during daylight hours. The Japanese still controlled the sea at night, running the Tokyo Express destroyer convoys down the slot to deliver reinforcements and supplies, but they could not operate safely during daylight, could not bring heavy equipment or adequate supplies, could not sustain major offensive operations. The Guadalcanal campaign devolved into a 6-month war of attrition. More naval battles followed. The Battle of the Eastern Solomons in late August, Cape Esperance in October, the Santa Cruz Islands in late October, the Naval Battle of Guadalcanal in mid-November, where American forces finally established naval superiority, the Battle of Tassafaronga on November 30th, another devastating Japanese night attack that sank 1 American cruiser and crippled 3 others. The waters around Guadalcanal earned the name Iron Bottom Sound from the dozens of warships and transports that went down. But the strategic momentum had shifted. Japan poured men and ships into Guadalcanal trying to retake Henderson Field, and could not. America, with vastly superior industrial capacity, replaced losses faster than Japan could inflict them. By December 1942, Japanese commanders recognized Guadalcanal was lost. They evacuated their surviving troops in February 1943. The first American offensive operation of the Pacific War had succeeded despite Savo Island. Not because of it. The defeat that should have destroyed the invasion had instead revealed systemic weaknesses the Navy could identify and correct before they proved fatal to the larger campaign. Return to that moment at 1:43 in the morning, August 9, 1942. Captain Reef Cole on the bridge of USS Vincennes, watching aerial flares bloom to the south, uncertain whether the searchlights illuminating ships meant friend or enemy. 7 minutes until Japanese shells would start falling. 37 minutes until his ship would be sinking. 1 hour and 7 minutes until he would order abandon ship. His hesitation, repeated across 3 cruisers of the Northern Force, was not cowardice. It was the final manifestation of a doctrine that assumed American technological superiority would ensure sufficient warning and reaction time to counter any Japanese attack. That doctrine had been tested at Savo Island and found catastrophically inadequate. The radar that should have detected approaching enemy ships was blind to targets behind land masses. The communication systems that should have transmitted intelligence rapidly delivered garbled reports hours late. The command structure that should have ensured coordinated defense instead produced confusion about who held authority when the Admiral left his flagship. The crew alertness that doctrine assumed could be maintained indefinitely collapsed after 2 days of continuous combat operations. The night fighting capability that American commanders believed they possessed proved inferior to Japanese training, optics, and doctrine developed over 2 decades. Yet this collision between assumption and reality, this brutal education purchased with over 1,000 lives and 4 frontline cruisers, ultimately strengthened American naval capability more than any tactical victory could have. The lessons learned at Savo Island reshaped American naval doctrine. Radar operators received better training in equipment limitations. Communication procedures were streamlined and standardized. Command relationships were clarified with explicit designation of tactical command authority. Crew rest and rotation schedules were revised to prevent exhaustion-induced errors. Night fighting tactics were developed specifically to counter Japanese long-lance torpedoes and superior optics. Most fundamentally, American commanders abandoned the assumption of inherent superiority. Admiral Turner's assessment that the Navy was obsessed with technical and mental superiority over the enemy identified the core problem. Savo Island shattered that obsession. Future American commanders approached Japanese forces with respect for enemy capabilities and healthy skepticism about their own. This psychological shift, as much as any tactical or technical improvement, enabled American forces to prevail in subsequent naval engagements around Guadalcanal and throughout the Pacific. The profound irony remains. The side that won tactically at Savo Island lost strategically. Admiral Mikawa's perfect night attack demonstration of Japanese naval prowess could not overcome his failure to destroy the transports. The side that lost tactically won strategically. The American disaster at Savo Island could not prevent Marines from holding Henderson Field and maintaining the beachhead that became the foundation for eventual victory. 4 cruisers rest on the bottom of Iron Bottom Sound: USS Quincy, USS Vincennes, USS Astoria, HMAS Canberra. Steel coffins for over 1,000 sailors who died believing they were protecting an invasion that depended on them. They were wrong about the tactical situation. The invasion survived their defeat, but they were right about the strategic importance of their mission. Holding Guadalcanal required sacrifice, and they provided it, though not in the manner anyone anticipated or desired. Today, the wrecks remain undiscovered except for Quincy, located by Robert Ballard in 1992, at depth of over 1,000 feet, lying upright on the seafloor, guns still trained out, a permanent memorial to the speed and violence of that August night. The other ships lie somewhere nearby in the darkness, marking the worst defeat in American naval history, and simultaneously marking the beginning of American naval ascendancy in the Pacific. Both truths coexist in the same stretch of water, the same moment in history. That is the lesson of Savo Island. Defeat and victory are not always opposites. Sometimes defeat teaches more than victory ever could, and sometimes losing a battle while maintaining strategic position matters more than winning a battle while abandoning strategic objective. The Marines held Guadalcanal. That was all that mattered. Thank you for watching. For more detailed historical breakdowns, check out the other videos on your screen now and don't forget to subscribe.